The morning of her wedding, Amara Osei stood in front of a mirror that cost more than her father's car, wearing a dress she had not chosen, in a city she had not asked to live in, and she made a decision. She would not cry, not from fear, not from longing, not from the quiet grief of watching the life she had planned fold itself up like a letter and slip under a door she could no longer reach. She was 28 years old. She had a master's degree in finance from the University of Ghana, a smile that made boardrooms quiet, and, as of 6 hours from now, a husband she had met exactly 4 times. His name was Kang Junho, and every single person who loved her had warned her about him. Her Aunt Abina had grabbed her wrist at the engagement dinner, eyes wide and whiskey bright. Aunt Abina, that man doesn't smile, Amara. Not once. The whole evening. What kind of man doesn't smile at his own engagement? Her university friend Fua had sent a voice note at midnight, whispering like someone might hear. Fua. I did research. His last 2 business partners both left the company. Left. Nobody leaves Kong Holdings voluntarily. There are rumors, Amara. Rumors about how he handles people who cross him. Even her own mother, the woman who had arranged this union, who had signed the papers beside Amara's father, who had worn her finest kint to the contract meeting in Seoul. Even she had pulled Amara close the night before and said, quietly, with love and warning woven into the same breath, "Mother, be careful with your heart, my daughter." Men like that one, they don't know how to hold something soft without breaking it. And yet, Amara thought of the one thing none of them had mentioned. The 4th time she met Kang Junho, at a business dinner in Accra, surrounded by her father's associates and his company's representatives. He had watched her correct a senior financial analyst's miscalculation in real time, in front of everyone, without hesitation. The table had gone awkward. The analyst had reddened. Her father had cleared his throat. Junho had said nothing. But afterward, walking past her toward the exit, he had paused, just a breath, and said, without looking at her, "Junho, you were right. He was wrong by 1.3 million. I noticed at the same time you did." He had kept walking. She had stood there, her champagne glass cold in her hand, feeling something she couldn't name shift behind her ribs. He had noticed. He had said nothing, because he wanted to see what she would do. They all warned her about the cold man. Nobody warned her about the war she was walking into. The wedding was held at a private estate outside Seoul, a place of sculpted gardens, stone walls draped in late autumn ivy, and a sky the color of old silver. It was the kind of beautiful that felt designed to intimidate. 300 guests, 2 families, 1 contract. The Osei family arrived from Accra in a wave of color, rich Ankara prints, gold jewelry, laughter that bounced off marble corridors like something that had never learned to be afraid of elegant spaces. Amara's father, Chief Emmanuel Osei, moved through the venue with the ease of a man who owned rooms simply by walking into them. He was old money, Ghanaian real estate and cocoa exports, a man who had turned a single plot of land in the 1980s into an empire that now touched 4 continents. He had chosen Kong Holdings as his legacy merger, and he had offered his daughter as the bridge. Not sold, he would say if anyone asked. A strategic alignment of families. A union of equals. Amara had not argued. She understood business. She understood legacy. She even understood, on a cold, intellectual level, the logic of it. What she was still learning to understand was whether she could survive the loneliness of being logical. The Kong family occupied the opposite wing of the estate with the quiet, coordinated efficiency of people who had rehearsed power so long they no longer noticed they were performing it. Kang Junho's mother, Madame Han Soo-yeon, was 71 years old and moved like a verdict. She wore pale gray silk, no jewelry except a single jade ring, and looked at Amara during their formal introduction with eyes that measured and filed and concluded, all within the span of a single handshake. Madame Han. In Korean, translated softly by the family aide, she has good posture, strong hands. Let's hope the rest of her is equally sturdy. Amara had smiled as if the words were a compliment. She had understood enough Korean to know they were not. Junho's younger brother, Kang Min-suk, was a different creature entirely. Where Junho was contained, quiet in the way that deep water is quiet, still on the surface, but moving with tremendous force underneath. Min-suk was warm, performatively warm, the kind of warm that made you feel chosen. He had kissed Amara's hand at the rehearsal dinner, called her sister with a grin that crinkled his eyes, brought her a glass of water she hadn't asked for, and leaned close to say, "Emjin Suk, don't let my brother scare you. He's better than he looks, warmer than he acts. Give him time." Amara had thanked him genuinely. She would remember this moment later. She would replay it many times. And each time, the warmth in his eyes would look a little different, a little more like a performance, a little more like the face a man wears when he needs you to trust him before he needs something from you. The ceremony itself was dual, a Korean paebik rite woven together with a Ghanaian knocking ceremony, traditions braided carefully by a cultural coordinator who had spent 3 months on the program. There were moments of genuine beauty. Amara's grandmother on video call from Kumasi, weeping happy tears. Junho's elderly aunt pressing a silk scarf into Amara's hands with a soft murmur of blessing. And then there was the moment that Amara would keep returning to in the weeks ahead, when the officiant asked Junho to face his bride. He turned to her, and for the first time in 4 meetings and 1 wedding, Kang Junho looked at her. Truly looked, not with assessment, not with the cool, measuring gaze she had catalogued, but with something quiet and unguarded, something that flickered for only a second before his training pulled it back behind glass. But she saw it. A man who was also afraid. A man who had also been offered to someone as a strategy. Jun Ho. Low. Only for her ears, before the vows began. "I know this isn't what either of us planned. But I don't break agreements. And I don't waste people." It was the least romantic thing anyone had ever said to her at an altar. It was also, somehow, exactly what she needed to hear. Marriage, Amara discovered, was a country with no maps. She moved into the Kang family compound, a sprawling modern estate in Songbuk-dong. All glass and clean lines and silence, so expensive it had its own kind of weight. She had a suite of rooms, a personal driver, a household manager named Mrs. Park who communicated entirely in efficient nods, and a husband who left for the office before 6 every morning and returned after 8 every evening. They were polite to each other. Meticulously, achingly polite. He asked if her rooms were comfortable. She said yes. She asked if there were meetings she should attend as his wife. He gave her a calendar. They had dinner together 3 times a week, a rule he'd suggested in what she now recognized as his version of making an effort, and talked about work, about the merger, about everything except the enormous, wordless thing that lived between them like a third person at the table. She did not tell him she was lonely. He did not tell her he was watching. But she was watching too. Amara Osei had not built a career in finance by ignoring patterns. She had grown up learning to read rooms, to notice what people revealed when they thought no one was paying attention, to hear the silence between sentences. And what she noticed, in those first 8 weeks in the Kang household, was this. The people who smiled at her the most were the ones she trusted the least. Min Suk came by the house often. Too often, perhaps, for a man who had his own apartment across the city. He was always easy, always warm, always bearing gifts. Coffee from a place he claimed was Amara's favorite, though she had only mentioned it once, in passing, at the wedding. A scarf in colors he said reminded him of Ghana. Invitations to join him and his friends for dinner on evenings when Junho was working late. "He's just being kind," she told herself. "He wants you to feel welcome." But there was something in the way he asked questions. Specific questions. About Amara's relationship with her father. About the merger terms. About how much Amara knew about the Osei family's financial holdings. "Your father must have told you things," he said once, tilting his head with a smile. About the deal structure. The asset allocations. Amara had smiled back. "Amara, my father tells me what I need to know." Emjin Suk, laughing softly. Of course he does." He had changed the subject. She had filed the conversation away like evidence. It was Junho's personal assistant, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s named Lee Ji-young, who, without intending to, gave Amara the first real thread to pull. Ji-young had brought a folder of documents to the house on a Sunday. Junho was in the study. Amara was in the garden, sitting with tea and a spreadsheet she'd been analyzing out of old habit, out of the need to keep her mind from going soft with disuse. Ji-young had paused on her way through, glanced at the spreadsheet, and said, with the tone of someone who respects competence on instinct, "Jae-young, you're looking at the Q3 consolidated reports?" "Amara, I found them in the shared drive. I hope that's all right." Jae-young, Pause. Of course. You're a director's wife. You have clearance. Another pause, quieter. You know there's a discrepancy. In the across subsidiary accounts. I assumed Director Kong had briefed you. Amara had kept her face very still. Amara. He prefers I reach my own conclusions. Ji-young had nodded, something approving moving briefly across her face, and walked inside. Amara spent the next 6 days going through every document in the shared drive she had access to. What she found made her set down her tea very carefully, close her laptop, walk to the window, and stand there for a long time looking at the garden without seeing it. The Accra subsidiary, the West African branch of Kong Holdings that the merger had created, was hemorrhaging money. Not from market losses, not from operational inefficiency, from internal transfers. Small, staggered, sophisticated. The kind of financial movement designed to look like noise until you stepped back far enough to see the shape of it. And the transfers were being routed through an account that bore a name she recognized. Not Kong, not Osei, a holding company registered in Luxembourg. A shell, clean and unremarkable. The signatory on the account was listed under a Korean name she didn't recognize, but the secondary contact, the administrative liaison, the person who received correspondence. Her hands went cold. She knew that email address. She had seen it on the business card in the pocket of Min Suk's blazer when he'd left it draped over a chair at dinner last Tuesday. She had not meant to look. She had simply noticed, the way she noticed everything, the way her mind cataloged details without asking permission. The account was not Min Suk's, but he knew about it, which meant she closed her eyes. Someone inside this family was stealing from the merger, and the person closest to her, the warm, gift-bearing, carefully friendly brother-in-law, was connected to it. The question that nearly stopped her heart was simpler and more devastating than the fraud itself. Did Junho know? She could not go to him immediately, not because she didn't trust him, or rather, not only because of that, but because she understood, with the precision of someone who had spent a decade watching deals collapse from inside the room, that accusation without ironclad proof was not bravery. It was ammunition handed to the wrong person. She needed more. She needed the full shape of it. So Amara did what she had always done when the problem was larger than the tools in front of her. She went back to first principles. She called her father. The call lasted 47 minutes. She did not tell him everything. Not yet. She asked careful questions, framed as curiosity, as a new wife wanting to understand the merger structure her husband managed. Chief Emmanuel Osei, who had not built 4 continents of business by being slow, heard something in his daughter's voice. Chief Osei, after a pause, Amara, what do you know? Amara, nothing yet. I'm asking what you know. Another pause. The sound of him sitting down. Chief Osei, there was a concern. 6 months ago, before the wedding, one of my accountants flagged an irregularity in the pre-merger audit. I raised it with the Kong legal team. They said it was resolved. Amara, who on the Kong legal team? Chief Osei, the brother. Min Suk handles the family's legal interests when the matter is internal. The line went very quiet. Amara, Papa, do not move any assets. Do not sign anything new. Not until I call you again. Chief Osei, voice dropping, Amara. Amara, I'm fine. I'm not in danger. But I need you to trust me the same way you trust any other director on your board. A beat. Then, with a roughness she recognized as love. Chief Osei, you have 48 hours before I get on a plane. She found the second thread through Madame Han. Junho's mother was not what Amara had expected, up close. The measuring gaze was real, yes. The severity was real. But underneath it was something Amara recognized from women in her own family. The particular exhaustion of a person who had spent decades holding a structure together with their bare hands and was never thanked for it. She began visiting Madame Han in the mornings. Not to charm her, not to perform the role of devoted daughter-in-law, but because she was genuinely curious, and because she suspected that Madame Han, who had watched her family closely for 71 years, knew more than she let on. They spoke about business at first, then about Korea in the 1980s, then about what it had cost Madame Han to raise 2 sons alone after her husband died. The company half-built, the lawyers circling, Min Suk only 7 years old and Junho 13, and already the one who never broke. And one morning, over tea, with the autumn garden going gold through the window, Madame Han said something that landed in Amara's chest like a key finding a lock. Madame Han. In careful, deliberate English she had been practicing, Amara realized. You are smarter than Min Suk expected. He told me you would be decorative. I told him decorative women do not correct financial analysts at dinner. Amara set down her cup very slowly. Amara, what did he expect me to do? In this marriage. Madame Han's eyes were old and clear and without apology. Madame Han, be a bridge. Be a signature. Give Junho a reason to stay in the merger long enough for Min Suk to finish what he started. Pause. I did not agree to it. But I am old, and my younger son has always known how to make things sound reasonable. Amara, quietly, does Junho know any of this? Madame Han, Junho knows his brother is reckless. He does not know how reckless. She looked at Amara directly. I am telling you because you will find out anyway. And I would rather you find out from me while there is still time to stop it without destroying the family. That evening, Amara did something she had not done in their 2 months of careful, polite cohabitation. She knocked on the door of Junho's study after 10 p.m. and walked in without waiting for an answer. He was at his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, surrounded by documents that she could now read like a language she'd spent months learning. He looked up. Something shifted in his face, not alarm. Recognition. He'd been expecting this. Maybe not tonight, but eventually. Amara, I need to show you something. Jun Ho. After a moment, sit down. She sat. She opened her laptop. She walked him through it. The transfers, the shell company, the Luxembourg account, the email address, the conversation with her father, and finally, quietly, what his mother had told her that morning. She watched his face as she talked. She had expected anger, or denial, or the cool shutting down she'd seen in boardrooms when a man is cornered. What she saw instead was something much harder to look at, a grief that had been sitting behind his eyes for a long time, waiting for someone to finally name it. He did not speak for a long time after she finished. Jun Ho. Finally, very quietly. How long have you been looking into this? Amara. 6 days since Ji Young pointed me toward the discrepancy. Longer since I started noticing Min Suk's questions. Jun Ho. And you didn't come to me sooner because… Amara. Because I didn't know if you were part of it. He flinched. Just barely. She kept her eyes steady. Amara, I know that's hard to hear, but you would have done the same. A long silence. Then, Jun Ho. Yes. Pause, I would have. He leaned back in his chair, ran one hand over his face in a gesture that was the most unguarded thing she'd ever seen him do. Jun Ho. I've been watching him for 3 months. Suspecting. I didn't have enough to act, and every time I got close, a document would be moved, an account would go quiet. He knows how to disappear evidence. He always has. Amara. Slowly. You needed someone he didn't know was looking. The silence between them changed shape. It became something different, not the silence of 2 strangers being careful with each other, but the silence of 2 people arriving at the same place from opposite directions. Jun Ho. Looking at her with that unguarded thing in his eyes again, and this time he didn't pull it back. Why didn't you take what you found to your father and leave? She held his gaze. Amara. Because that's not what you do when you're in a merger. You don't pull out and burn the bridge. You find out where the rod is, and you cut it out. Pause. And because I made a promise at an altar, I keep my agreements too. Something crossed Junho's face that she couldn't fully name. It was quieter than gratitude and more permanent than relief. He reached across the desk and turned her laptop toward him. Looked at the documents again for a long moment. Jun Ho. We have maybe 1 week before Min Suk realizes what we know. He has a scheduled meeting with the Accra subsidiary board in 10 days. Amara. He's planning to finalize the transfer before then. Jun Ho. Yes. Amara. Then we have 8 days to build a case that holds in court. Alert both family legal teams simultaneously so neither side can bury it, and do it without tipping him off. Junho looked at her for a moment that stretched long enough to mean something. Jun Ho. You've already planned it, haven't you? Not a question. She reached into the folder she'd carried in and slid 4 pages of notes across the desk. He read them, turned to the 2nd page, then the 3rd. For the first time in their entire marriage, in 8 weeks of polite dinners and careful distance, Kang Junho smiled at his wife. It was small, controlled, but it was real. Jun Ho. You're terrifying. Amara. I know. The betrayal, when the full shape of it emerged, was bigger than either of them had seen. It was not just Min-suk. On day 3 of their quiet, coordinated investigation, running searches through dual access, Amara pulling financial threads while Junho applied pressure through legal channels he controlled directly, bypassing the family firm, Ji-young flagged something that stopped them both cold. The Luxembourg holding company had a second signatory. Not Min-suk, not any Kong, an Osei, not the chief, not Amara, not anyone in the immediate family. A cousin, Kwame Oseibansu, a man Amara knew from family gatherings, quiet and forgettable, who worked as a liaison in her father's overseas accounts division. Amara sat with that information for an hour before she could speak about it. Amara, voice very controlled, he had someone on my side. Jun Ho, carefully, it appears so. Since before the wedding. Amara, the marriage was never meant to bridge the families. Jun Ho, no. It was meant to give them access to both sides long enough to drain the across subsidiary and exit before anyone traced it back. Pause. You were the bridge, yes. But not between our families. Quietly. Between them and the money. Amara stood up, walked to the window. He let her have the silence. After a long moment. Amara, my father doesn't know about Kwame. Jun Ho, I don't believe he does. Amara, my father chose this marriage in good faith. He was building something real. Her voice didn't break, but it came close. And someone inside his own family was selling the foundation out from under him. Jun Ho, quietly, Amara. She turned. He had moved from behind the desk and was standing a few feet away, not crowding her, not reaching for her, but present in a way he hadn't been before. A specific, deliberate nearness. Jun Ho, I know what it costs to find out someone inside the family was the danger. Pause. I've known since I was 19 that Min-suk watches exits while everyone else watches entrances. I built every safeguard I had around that knowledge. Beat. I still didn't see it coming this far. Amara, quietly, how are you so calm? Jun Ho, I'm not calm. And for a moment his voice dropped its finish, its controlled surface, and underneath was something raw and exhausted. I am furious. My brother used my marriage to steal from my company and from your family. He used me, and I let him stay close because I kept hoping I was wrong about him. Silence. I am very far from calm. Amara looked at him, truly looked, the way she had at the altar, past the glass and the control to the person underneath, and made a decision. She took 3 steps across the space between them and put her hand over his, where it had tightened around the edge of the desk. He went very still. Amara, we finished this together. He looked down at her hand, then up at her face. Jun Ho, barely above a whisper, together. Day 7. They moved fast and quietly, the way experienced operators always move. Not with drama, not with visible urgency, but with the particular, lethal efficiency of people who understand that the most important moments in any battle happen before anyone else knows the battle has started. Amara had worked alongside Junho nearly 18 hours a day for 5 days. They had stopped being polite. They had stopped being careful with each other. There was no time for performance and no energy for distance. They worked in his study, on opposite sides of the same desk, passing documents back and forth, building a case architecture that was airtight on both sides of the merger: Korean law, Ghanaian law, international financial regulation. Ji-young brought coffee and asked no questions and was, Amara recognized, the third corner of their quiet triangle. Madame Han knew. She stayed out of the way and once, passing Amara in the corridor at 6 in the morning, pressed her hand briefly and said nothing. It was the warmest thing she had ever done. On day 6, Min-suk came to dinner. He did not know. That was the extraordinary thing. The thing that would have broken Amara's admiration for her own stillness if she'd allowed herself to feel it. He sat at the table, easy and warm and generous with his laughter, bringing news about friends and gossip about Seoul society, refilling her wine glass and calling her sister, and she smiled and asked questions and gave him nothing. Junho was equally impenetrable. 2 months into this marriage, Amara had spent enough time watching him to know the cost of that performance. The precise, invisible effort it took for a man whose feelings ran that deep to show nothing at all. She watched him answer his brother's questions. She watched him lean back easily and let Min-suk talk. She watched him maintain, without a crack, the fiction that nothing had changed. After Min-suk left, she found Jun-ho in the kitchen, not in the study, not at his desk, but standing at the kitchen counter with a glass of water, looking at nothing. She did not ask how he was. She stood beside him and looked at nothing too. After a moment, he set down the glass and reached, very slowly, like a man who had learned to be careful with fragile things, and took her hand. They stood there for a while in the quiet kitchen without speaking. It was the most intimate thing that had happened in their marriage. Day 7, 10 a.m. The meeting was scheduled under false pretenses, an internal audit review that Junho had called through official channels, framed as routine compliance, the kind of thing Min-suk and Kwame would have seen coming too late to avoid without making themselves visible. They arrived separately. Min-suk to the Kong Holdings boardroom on the 32nd floor. Kwame to a parallel meeting at Osei Group's Seoul liaison office across the city, where Chief Emmanuel had flown in the night before. Amara had called her father 4 days earlier with everything. The full picture, the full evidence, the full architecture. There had been a long silence on the line. Then, Chief Osei, Kwame. One word. She'd heard 40 years of heartbreak in it. Amara, I'm sorry, Papa. Chief Osei. After another silence, and his voice when it came back was not broken but rebuilt, hard and decided. We finish it clean. I'll handle my side. You handle yours. Amara, I know. Chief Osei. Quietly. Your mother said you were too young for this marriage. Amara, I know. Chief Osei. I told her you were exactly the right age. Pause. I was right. But not the way I expected. The Kong Holdings boardroom at 10 a.m. was full of gray autumn light and the smell of expensive coffee, and 5 members of the company's legal team, 2 external auditors, and Kong Junho, standing at the head of the table with his hands clasped behind his back, in the particular stillness he wore when he had already won and was simply waiting for everyone else to understand it. Min-suk walked in, saw the room, and spent 3 seconds. Amara counted them from the seat she'd taken at the side wall. Observer role, not principal. Exactly where he would least expect her to matter, recalibrating. He was good. She gave him that. His face moved through surprise and into ease without pausing at fear. He smiled. He took his seat. He said, Jin-suk, Junho, this is more formal than you mentioned. Jun-ho, the situation warranted it. The lead auditor laid a document on the table. Min-suk looked at the cover page. His eyes moved to Amara. She watched something finally crack behind his warmth. Not guilt. Not yet. Calculation. How much does she know? How did she get there? How long has she? She met his gaze without expression. Long enough. Jun-ho. Quietly. The Luxembourg account. The Accra transfers. The 18-month extraction that was scheduled to complete in 3 days. Pause. We have everything, Minnie. He used the childhood nickname. Amara watched what it did to both of them. The grief it opened in Junho, the way it moved across Min-suk's face like a shadow. And Min-suk, after a long pause, dropping the warmth entirely. And what was underneath it was not cold, exactly, but tired. I built this company too, Junho. I kept it running while you were in the US. I made decisions that kept us solvent in 2018. And then you came back and the company bore your name and your name only. Jun-ho, you could have talked to me. Min-suk, I did. You didn't hear me. Jun-ho, and his voice didn't harden. It went quiet, which was worse. I know. And I'm sorry for that. But this, he gestured at the documents. This wasn't a conversation. This was a demolition. Silence. Jun-ho, the board will review the charges. The legal team will handle the process. The Osei family's representatives are present through parallel proceedings. Pause. I wanted you to hear it from me first. That was the last thing I could give you. Min-suk looked at the table for a long moment. Then he looked at Amara. Min-suk, I underestimated you. Amara. Evenly. Everyone does. It's usually their first mistake. Jin-suk. Something almost like admiration, wry and sad. And their last. Amara. Yes. Across the city, in the Osei Group liaison office, Chief Emmanuel Osei sat across from his cousin's son and did not raise his voice once. He didn't need to. He simply laid the documents on the table and said, with the calm of a man who had been building empires longer than Kwame had been alive, Chief Osei, I gave your father his first business loan in 1987. I paid for your university. I brought you into my company because your mother asked me to and because I believed in you. Pause. Tell me the number. Tell me how much you took. Kwame told him. Chief Emmanuel nodded once. Then he told him what would happen next. The legal process, the repayment structure, the family consequences, the boundary that would never be uncrossed. He said it all in a level voice, without drama, without cruelty. And when he finished, he stood up and said, Chief Osei, my daughter found what 2 teams of lawyers missed. Remember that. Whatever else you think about this family, remember that. He walked out. In the weeks after, the case moved through both legal systems with the quiet, irresistible gravity of a glacier, slow enough that you might not feel it if you weren't watching, but absolute in its direction. Min-suk's lawyers negotiated. The Luxembourg account was frozen. Kwame cooperated in exchange for reduced charges. The Accra subsidiary was stabilized by a joint emergency committee, Amara on the Osei side, Ji-young on the Kong side, and a forensic accounting team from Nairobi that Amara had brought in herself. The merger did not collapse. This was the thing that surprised everyone who hadn't been watching closely. Because what Min-suk and Kwame had built their scheme on, the assumption that exposure would destroy the partnership, that the Osei family would pull out and the Kong family would fracture, was wrong, because it was based on a version of this marriage that had not survived contact with reality. It assumed Amara was a bridge. It never considered that she might become a foundation. On a Thursday evening in late November, with the first snow beginning to fall on the garden in Songbuk-dong, Amara and Junho had their first dinner that was not about work. Mrs. Park had cooked jollof rice, or her interpretation of it. Amara had guided her over 2 afternoons with both delight and some diplomatically delivered corrections, alongside doenjang jjigae and fried plantain, and the result was improbable and somehow perfect. They ate without documents between them for the first time in months. Junho, after a silence that was comfortable now, the way silence becomes when 2 people have stopped performing for each other. Ji-young told me you've been talking to 3 Accra-based firms about setting up a permanent regional oversight function. Amara, you said I had director-level clearance. Junho, I said you had clearance to review documents. I didn't say. He stopped, because she was watching him with patient amusement. You're restructuring my regional operations. Amara, I'm fixing a gap that nearly cost both our families everything. You can tell me to stop. He looked at her across the table. Junho, the proposal you showed me yesterday had a 14% efficiency gain in the first-year projection. Amara, conservative estimate. Junho, I know. Pause. It was 17 when I ran the numbers myself. A beat. Then Amara laughed, really laughed, the kind that surprised her, the kind she hadn't felt since before this whole year began. Amara, you check my math. Junho, a ghost of a smile, you check mine first. At the engagement dinner. Amara, you noticed that before you told me. Junho, I noticed everything. From the beginning. Pause, quieter. I just didn't know what to do with what I was noticing. The snow was coming down steadily outside. Inside, the dinner table held 2 plates of improbable food and 2 people who had been aimed at each other by circumstance and had ended up choosing each other through something much less tidy than a contract. Amara, softly, what are you noticing now? He looked at her for a long moment. Junho, that I don't want this to be a strategic alliance. He said it with difficulty, with the careful precision of someone who rarely says true things out loud. I want it to be a marriage. An actual one. Pause. I'm aware I am not an easy person. I'm aware that Amara, Junho, have not given you much reason to. Amara, Junho. He stopped. She reached across the table the way she had reached across the desk that night in his study. Not impulsive, not performative, but deliberate. Her hand over his. Amara, I'm already here. 3 words. He looked at her hand. At her face. At the snow through the window. Back at her face. And Kong Junho, the cold man, the controlling man, the impossible-to-love man, said. Junho, I know you are. Quietly, roughly. I'm trying to deserve it. Amara, then try harder at dinner conversation and we'll call it even. He laughed. It was the first real laugh she'd heard from him, low and real and startled out of him by genuine warmth, and it did something very serious to her composure. She kept her face calm. She was a professional. But this is where I have to tell you about the phone call. because the world had not finished with them yet. 2 days after that dinner, on a Saturday morning when the garden was white and Amara was moving through the kitchen in Junho's too large cardigan and absolutely not thinking about the fact that she was wearing his cardigan, her phone rang. Unknown number. Seoul area code. She almost didn't answer. Amara, hello. A pause. Then a woman's voice, composed, older, familiar in a way Amara couldn't immediately place. Mrs. Kong, I think you and I need to meet. There is something about the Luxembourg account that your investigation did not find. Something that was buried deeper than the transfers. Pause. Something that involves a name your husband has been protecting for 15 years. Amara went very still. Amara, who is this? Someone who was also married to a Kong man. Someone who was also meant to be a bridge. A beat. And someone who learned, too late, what gets built on bridges when nobody is watching. The line went quiet, not disconnected, just waiting. Outside, Amara could hear Junho moving in the study. The sound of his keyboard, the ordinary domestic rhythm of a morning, she had just begun to feel safe inside. She looked out at the snow-covered garden. She thought about everything she knew, everything she'd found, the shape of what had been uncovered. And she understood, with the particular intelligence that had always made her dangerous to underestimate, that they had found the branch. They had not yet found the root. Amara, voice steady, eyes on the garden, tell me where. They warned her he was cold. He was not cold. He was a man who had been alone so long in his own fortress that he'd forgotten there was a door, until she walked through the wall. They warned her he was controlling. He was not controlling. He was afraid of losing what little he held, the way anyone is afraid when loss is the only teacher they have ever had. They warned her he was impossible to love. And perhaps, once, that had been true. But Amara Osei had never been interested in what was possible. She had always been interested in what was true. And the truth, the full truth, the root beneath the root, was still waiting. For both of them. Together. If you made it this far, you already know, this story is not over. The woman on the phone knows something about Kang Junho that predates Min Suk. That predates the merger. That predates everything Amara thought she was walking into. Who is she? What did she survive? And what is the name that Junho has been protecting? And why? Leave a comment. Subscribe. Because the next chapter is where it gets dangerous.